The story begins with a mysterious man talking about an invisible force. It can knock someone off their feet. He is Jordan Myers and calls himself a paranormal expert. He's speaking in a video on a laptop and expresses his sympathy for everyone in this time of crisis. We learn from him that the streets are empty. Jordan says their stillness is opening an opportunity for spirits that choose to wander. Some will be harmless, but some will have evil intent. He has felt these paranormal energies getting stronger. They feed on fears during this lockdown. The scene ends with him urging his viewers to reach out to those they care about. The next scene leads us to a normal, bustling day. Soon our attention focuses on a woman as she enters her outhouse. In there, she hears strange voices that sound ghostly. At this moment, we learn it is the first week of the lockdowns. The scene switches to a lady talking to her mom on the phone, saying the supermarket was awful because the people there were scared and angry. Lucky for her, she says she has plenty of healthy food before ending the call. When she goes to the refrigerator, we notice a bowl moving on the counter by itself. Our attention is then brought to a girl talking to her mom on the phone. Her mother says she was told to isolate herself for 14 days. Her online shopping is sorted out, and the pharmacy will deliver her prescriptions. So there is nothing to worry about. As she says that, she begins coughing uncontrollably, but still assures her daughter that she's okay. Returning to the lady from the previous scene, Amy, her bowl eerily moves again. Shortly after, it suddenly flies at a high speed, shattering on the floor. She picks up one of the shards, before looking at her knife block for several seconds. Once she leaves, one of the knives is taken out by an invisible force. Subsequently, we see a somewhat elderly woman talking on video on a laptop. She says that at the parapsychology unit, she and her colleagues are observing an increase in reports of paranormal activity. Some people are experiencing extreme psychological distress. They sense entities latching onto their fears. As she continues to talk, we see another lady jogging outside with a face mask on. Arriving near her house, she is now safe to remove it. Her 2 dogs are waiting for her inside. While she cuts an orange in the kitchen, she gets a disturbing image of probably herself, getting restrained by someone. The next scene has a man calling a detective lady named George. He informs her that they have confirmation of a certain person having tested positive for the virus. We get a brief flashback of the man in question being detained by the police. He spits on George's face and laughs about it. So George's boss tells her this means she gets 14 days of isolation. Switching back to Amy, she talks to her boyfriend over a video call, telling him she has been drinking like everyone else because there isn't anything else to do. After she tells him about the bowl flying off on its own, he dismisses it by saying she's been drinking too much. As they keep talking, we see drawers uncannily opening by themselves in her house. When Amy gets up, she comes to her cabinet and sees an open drawer. Closing it, she turns around scared. Soon enough, it abruptly opens by itself again, scaring her even more. She backs away slowly, seeing a ghost materialize. It holds a knife in its hand. Amy turns on the light, which makes the ghost vanish, but the knife is still floating in midair. Therefore, Amy runs away into another room, closing its door. The knife flies into it. She calls her boyfriend, fearfully telling him there is someone in the house with her. As she talks, a piece of clothing wraps around her neck, choking her. It does not take long for the suffocating cloth to take her life. Listening to her ordeal, the boyfriend gets scared and calls the police. Following this, we observe the lady who had the disturbing vision, Chloe, talking to her mother via video call. The mom tells her daughter she just came back from the hospital. Chloe wants to know if she passed on her message to her dad. Her mom tells Chloe that she can only see him through a glass panel. It is somewhat scary to her, yet she thinks he will be fine. Chloe thinks they have to get him out of there. Before Chloe ends the call, her mom reminds her about social distancing. Returning to Detective George, her boss calls again to give her some work. After he describes the case George received, we recognize that he spoke about the demise of Amy. George is happy she finally has a case. Later, we see a young girl entering her apartment building. She turns around when she hears faint ghostly sounds nearby. Once she enters her flat, she puts a drink in the refrigerator. Upon returning to the front door, she sees it is open. It's certainly strange to her, but she does nothing about it. Switching back to George, she looks at a report detailing Amy's crime scene. She also looks at photos of the deceased Amy. Looking at certain markings on her arm, George asks herself how the crime scene personnel missed it. After that, we watch Chloe coming to her front door and seeing it open. She closes it, locking it this time. Since that's not enough to feel safe, she arms herself with a baseball bat before slowly ascending to the second floor. There she is haunted by the disturbing vision again. In the next scene, we see another girl in her flat. listening to a radio telling her that in Britain, over 17,000 people have tested positive for the coronavirus. Of those, the fatalities have surpassed 1,000. We see one more new girl talking to her boyfriend over a video call. There are oddly a lot of females in this movie. On top of this, they all mostly look the same. The girl's boyfriend says he has to fly to Moscow today, and she will have to get by. She tells him he can't leave her like this, but he's in a rush. The girl pleads for him to fly her back to Russia. The scene switches back to the girl whom we saw previously. She sees a door open by itself. She is Kat, deciding to check what made the door open. All she does is look ahead for a few seconds before closing the door. Later, she talks to her boyfriend over a video call like everyone else, to tell him about the weird occurrence. He thinks the wind could have done it. Afterward, while the Russian girl sleeps, her luggage gets unzipped by an invisible force. Soon she sits up to look at the open luggage. The moment she gets out of bed, the luggage suddenly moves, frightening her. In the meantime, Kat experiences the same kind of paranormal activity. Many items in the kitchen fall on the floor, while objects start flying in the room for the Russian girl. Panicking, Kat calls her boyfriend, urging him to come to her immediately. Unfortunately, the ghosts start choking her and the Russian girl simultaneously, seemingly causing their demise. At the other end, we see George talking to a lady named Rachel over video. Amongst other things, she tells Rachel about the case she received. After they talk, George's boss calls her again to say there are now 2 more cases like Amy's. Following this, we see a young lady who has 2 lists of things to do. She is currently cleaning. When someone knocks on her door, she looks worried. Getting to the door, the girl wipes its knob to be safe from viruses. Her name is Angie. She opens the door to find a package sitting in front of her. She takes it inside, when suddenly her scrubber violently shoots upwards in the room she came from. Angie is full of fear upon seeing her tool out of place. It makes her drop the package. Subsequently, another detective tells George that all 3 cases of deceased victims seem to be caused by asphyxiation. Interestingly, he says the culprit has left neither a fingerprint nor a smudge anywhere. There is also no sign of a break-in. However, there were markings made by a knife inside a cupboard. They were the letters X and Y, just like what George observed on Amy's arm. Later on, we see Jordan Myers talking on video again. Rachel is watching him, hearing the expert say that this is perhaps the most devastating occurrence he has ever witnessed. Once the video ends, she writes something in her notes. We notice she is being haunted like the others. No one seems to be safe. Returning to Angie, the fastidious girl talks to her dad on a video call. Some of her spice jars move after she touches them. When she ends the call, she notices this, causing her to wear a look of confusion. Angie reaches out to a jar, and chaos ensues. In other rooms, her bed cover moves, and the refrigerator door opens. The haunting is out of control. What else can the poor girl do except cry in fear? Switching to George, she gets a call from Rachel. The latter mentions the markings George saw. She also says there is a theory going around that people think some energies or spirits are at play. George thinks this is nonsense, but Rachel wants her to look at a certain link she sent. Later, George watches a talk from Jordan. It must be the link from Rachel. Jordan says that paranormal energies are becoming stronger. Some will be harmful. It is the same video that opened the film. Switching back to Angie, the girl cries while talking to her dad on video. She tells him she thinks someone is in the house. Additionally, she worries that she missed nearly all of her jobs today. Moving along to another new lady, the dozenth one with blonde hair. We see her engaged in yoga outside. Images of her in the exercise blend in with her talking on the phone. She complains that her trip has been canceled because no one is allowed to fly. She feels like there is someone or something in her house. To explain what she means, the lady says she remembers closing all the doors, but after her yoga class, she found them all open. The next scene has George using a police site to search for the number of people who lost their lives from asphyxiation. The result is impressive, with 189 entries. Eventually, she gets this number down to 1 by specifying her search to include no forensics, mutilation, and the letters X and Y. This single entry belongs to a man named Lyndon Robbins. George learns he lost his life in prison. Shifting back to the yoga lady, she is scared to find an open drawer in the kitchen. Soon she sees all of them opening simultaneously, with their items flying out. Running to the front door sadly does not help, for it closes on her and refuses to open. The poor lady gets thrown on the couch, where scissors fly into her and take her life. Angie experiences a similar fate at her place. This is how the first week of the lockdowns concludes. The second week starts with George on a video call with Jordan Myers. The detective seems to have come around to believing in the paranormal activities. She asks the man how it is possible for spirits to harm anyone. He tells her some spirits could be strong and angry. George watches Jordan experience a moment of unease. She asks another question, whether a spirit could take a person's life. This is a question he thinks she already knows the answer to. Shortly after, the paranormal activity rises in his house, bringing fear to Jordan. He thinks he doesn't have much more time left. The final question George asks is how she is to stop a serial assassin who is already deceased. She needs to find out why its spirit is still there, Jordan replies. What triggered it to want to commit those crimes in the first place? When random objects eerily start flying around in his room, he is forced to cancel the call. He is not alone in his haunting, because George witnesses the cabinet move behind her. It seems to spark a flashback of her as a young girl. An unseen man scares her by placing a piece of paper on her desk. At a different time, Jordan leaves a message on George's phone. He says he has a follower who lives much closer to her. The man is Dr. Maxwell, an expert in the field of what they're dealing with. Jordan struggles to leave his message, wheezing his way through it. Then he advises George to treat the spirit with compassion, for all people are born of grace. Those who are not graceful simply fall from it. If the detective does this, she will find the trigger that started the crimes. Afterward, we transition to Maxwell at his place. The man sits, addressing any spirit that might be there to talk to him. He says he has created the passageway, a circle of 5 hag stones. In a few seconds, the stones move beneath his hands. Maxwell also sees a rocking chair move by itself. Amazed by the appearance of a spirit, he starts recording it. When the chair stops rocking, he comes closer to it, and it suddenly rocks again, frightening him. In the next scene, we see the girl we haven't seen in a long time. She is Nicola, talking to her mother via video call. As they talk, the door behind the girl slowly closes. Unfortunately, her mom does not notice this. Before the call ends, Nicola tells her mom to call her if she gets worse. Once Nicola disconnects, her door suddenly shuts, scaring her. Like with the others, the problem doesn't end there. Items start flying and falling to emphasize that extra scare. Thankfully, the door opens, allowing Nicola to run out. Shifting to our investigator, George calls her boss to say she thinks she has a match for her cases. The lady tells him about Lyndon, how he was called the locksmith, because he was an expert at breaking into people's houses undetected. Sometimes he would stay in their homes for hours or even days. At the time of his victim's demise, Lyndon left the 2 letters either on them or near them. There were times he wore a mask, but it was never found. George also says he loved blondes, which is why we are seeing such a large number of them. Responding to all of this, her boss asks where this maniac is now, and she says he lost his life in prison. It happened on the first day of the lockdown. Switching back to Nicola, the scared girl ventures outside of her house. She calls the police, informing them of her situation. The problem is that the operator wants a description of the culprit, something Nicola cannot provide. This prompts the man to say that wasting the police's time is a serious offense, so she ends the call. George has a video call with Dr. Maxwell, who thinks it's strange that a member of the police called him. After she tells him about her case, he is amazed the police finally want his help. However, George lets him know this is unofficial. This is her personal call. It is unlike anything else she has ever seen. Maxwell says that when people give these spirits what they want, the spirits become stronger. It's just that some of them feed off of fear, unless it's forgiveness that they truly want. Every attack comes from a lack of love, he believes. This will go on for an eternity, unless the source of this imbalance is redressed. But George considers it preposterous that this evil ghost is looking for love. Maxwell tells her if it had love, they would not be having this conversation. Following this, our attention is brought to George's boss as he sleeps. His door opens, and a ghostly boy enters his room. Seeing the boy, the man gets scared. For some reason, he tells the ghost he is very sorry. This makes the boy form an expression as if he's upset. In the morning, the boss calls George, telling her he wants to meet her at a certain church in 30 minutes. When she arrives, he asks if she has any leads on her case. She tells him she's working on it, and he inquires if there is anything unusual happening to her. George wonders if he means a supernatural force is present. At this moment, he shares with her that he took a child. While he was driving at a much younger age, he hit a boy whom he did not see. The man trembles, sharing with George that the boy was in his house last night. The boy forgave him and wanted the boss to forgive himself. Once the ghost boy vanished, the weight the man was carrying around for more than half of his life vanished too. Hearing such a revelation, George says she does have a lead. Later on, we see another blonde lady in her house. She is Victoria, experiencing a paranormal phenomenon, making her fearful. This unpleasant feeling soon grows when she notices a man wearing a mask in her dark hallway. Turning on the light makes him disappear. Afterward, we see Chloe, the character we thought the story chose to abandon. A ball rolls down her stairs, prompting her to get up from her comfortable couch and approach it. She kneels to pick it up and a door opens near her. A masked Lyndon comes out to grab her arm, yet he disappears in a short time. At a different time, Chloe calls her mom to inform her about her abuser being back, but the woman tells her daughter he is deceased. Suddenly, she yells Chloe's name because she sees the man behind her. Once he vanishes, the laptop screen distorts. All of this causes Chloe to run out of her house. She knocks on her neighbor's door, pleading to be let inside. Alas, the homeowner does not comply with the terrified lady's wishes. So she comes back home and tells herself none of this is real. At the other end, Victoria heads off to bed. Her dress falls off its hanger and starts sliding toward her on the floor. Soon Victoria finds the dress lying near her on the bed. As she reaches for it, we see Lyndon instantly using it to choke the helpless lady to her demise. With this, the story enters the third week of the lockdowns. George discovers that there was one person who survived Lyndon's attacks. This person is Chloe, whom the detective leaves a voice message for. She says she wants to talk to her, thinking Chloe may shed some light on this case. While she leaves the message, Chloe experiences paranormal activities in her house. Thankfully, they don't escalate as much. After that, George talks to Maxwell on the phone. She asks the expert if an object like a knife could be thrown by a ghost with enough force to penetrate something. He tells her that without a doubt this can occur. This leads her to ask if symbols can be carved in the same way as well. Maxwell says if a spirit wanted to carve its name into her, she wouldn't be able to stop it. George ends the call and is distressed over what she's learned. Following this, the detective looks at many photos regarding her case. When she comes across a photo of Lyndon, she feels a disturbing presence. At this moment, we get a flashback of her as a young girl again. She sits in a corner crying, while an unseen man approaches her. Shortly after, George calls her boss to inform him about Lyndon having a brother. He's been living alone for the past 30 years, and George believes he may have something to do with this. She wants to visit him, but her boss urges her to stay at home due to their quarantine. Of course, the daring investigator does not listen to him. Before long, she arrives at a house and knocks on its door. The first thing she asks the man who opens it is if he is Ian Robbins, Lyndon's brother. After he confirms that he is, George enters his home for a chat. She asks him what made his brother commit those crimes, adding that she's working on a case of a murderer who has a similar modus operandi to Ian's brother. This prompts the man to show her a photo of Lyndon as a young boy. He says they got sent to boarding school, which he likens to hell. Bad things went on in there with Lyndon and the headmaster. The name of the school is Sherdown. At the other end, we see Chloe listening to the message George sent her. Upon finishing it, she calls the detective, telling her that Lyndon has been in her house. But she can't describe him because she has not seen him. He keeps coming back, with his actions growing worse each time. George has good news for her. She can help Chloe stop the wicked man. George wants her to write down that Lyndon went to Sherdown School. To their dismay, the phone starts distorting. However, this does not stop the determined detective from squeezing in the information through the phone. She tells Chloe that the culprit was by the headmaster. With her saying this, the ghost appears again and starts choking Chloe. George realizes Lyndon is there and tries talking to him due to Chloe's phone still being on. She tells the evil spirit that it's not his fault. She knows they messed him up. Plus, she knows what it's like. George isn't lying, for she was a too. With all this said to him, the enraged ghost of Lyndon starts coming to his senses and eases his grip on Chloe. George finishes by saying she forgives him. Fortunately, Chloe is now able to breathe. Her savior advises the young lady to go somewhere safe. Afterward, George's boss talks to her on the phone, telling her they picked up another call from a troubled girl. The one he has in mind is Nicola. We see her calling her mom out of fear. The mother tries to help Nicola by telling her not to be afraid. Soon the paranormal activities start, and a scared Nicola sits on the floor. Despite letting go of Chloe previously, Lyndon is there to give hell to this poor girl. He presses her against the floor, making her say he's not real, and that she's not afraid of him. Through her belief, she is able to beat the ghost. She exits the house, seeing George reaching her to offer her support. Later, George talks to Rachel, telling her that she's waiting for her test results. If the test is negative, she will come back the next day. At night, Rachel watches the news of a politician, saying they are all seeing the horrible impact of the invisible murderer. Suddenly, the television turns off unexpectedly. Rachel tries turning it on, but to no avail. She reaches for her cup, and it flies away, along with the stool it stood on. Panicking, Rachel rushes to the room her daughter sleeps in. The doors closing on her make this task challenging. Shifting to Dr. Maxwell, the man calls up George. He leaves her a message, in which he says the situation is worse than he initially thought. However, he doesn't get around to saying anything else because Lyndon fatally attacks him. Returning to Rachel, she enters her daughter's room to take the girl in her arms. After that, she also calls George to leave a message. Rachel tells George that she's taking her daughter to her parents' house due to the ghost haunting her place. In the next scene, George wakes up and listens to the message Rachel left her. It alerts her to get out of bed, but the door closes on her, not allowing her to leave. It starts cracking to form the letters X and Y. George demands to know what this savage ghost wants from her. He responds by slamming her down on the couch. He then forces her to take a pen and start writing something on her stomach. Once she writes it, the short-lived madness ends. She looks at what he made her write, and it states, "End this." Looking at the floor, George sees cut-out letters coming together to form the phrase, "Our." Then she looks at her computer, which has a newspaper article on it from 1971. It states that the Sherdown headmaster was cleared of all his charges. The newspaper article changes to show another one from 1970. The headmaster switched to an all-girls school. That is where he supposedly abused George like he did Lyndon. This information prompts George to sit against the wall in turmoil. She recalls how the man put down a piece of paper on her desk with the letters X and Y written on it. Now that she knows what she needs to know, the ghost of Lyndon opens the door for her, allowing her to leave. She ventures out there, perhaps to avenge Lyndon as well as herself.